All right, we're up.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the City of St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee Designation Subcommittee meeting for Friday, June 13th, 2025. Time is now 2:37 p.m. and seeing as we have just reached quorum, I'll call the meeting to order. We begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. We now move on to today's agenda. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda? None, I believe. Oh, Lauren?
I think unless Mark shows up, then his item will skip over it.
Right, I
But
guess that would be a deletion by default.
deletion, yeah.
Okay. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Robert, and in favor? That's carries. So the motion that the designation subcommittee adopt the heritage, I should have read the motion beforehand, I apologize. Yeah, are you okay with that?
I think, yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. We now move to consideration of the minutes of the previous meeting, May 16th, 2025. Are there any questions, comments, or changes? Okay, seeing none. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes? Brian, moved by Brian and Nari, that the designation subcommittee approve the minutes of the meeting held on Friday, May 16th, 2025. In favor? 3 in favor, 3 of 3. So that carries. Declarations of interest. I have an interest in item 7.1 related to the property on St. Paul Crescent. So I will pass the chair duties over to Brian at that point. Does anyone else have anything to mention? No? All right, so we move on to item 7.1, Brian acting as chair henceforth.
I guess I should unmute myself. That would always help. So moving on to 143 to 153 St. Paul Crescent. I guess, Lauren, you're going to lead us through the discussion of the attributes of the buildings.
Yeah, so just following up with the direction that the committee gave last month for this property, I met with Andrew at the site with the revised statement and attributes. And then also I know the committee had or the subcommittee had some questions about the foundations and about the rear elevations. So let me just share my screen. I'll keep it quick on both of these, but just wanted to report back. We did take a look at the foundations, and they were stone, and they're very, very tall. It's very interesting down there. You can really see like that the former use as a grocery reflected down there because they have several cold cellar areas, and again, there's lots of room for storage down there. So that was really interesting. And we also took a look at some of the rear elevations and some of the rear window openings, and yeah, went through the heritage attributes and refined them. So I'm not going to do a big whole presentation again because we went through that last month. But I just wanted to give the subcommittee members another chance to look over the heritage attributes, as amended based on the feedback we got last meeting, and no major changes or no changes at all with my discussion with Andrew. We decided to go with central circular opening within roof line for the Neptune Fire Hall description of that kind of medallion area. And that's because there are just so many questions about it still. And we know that it's an opening, but we don't know what's behind there. And that's something that's still going to be discovered. But otherwise adding all the things that the committee suggested, the foundation, the parapet to the Neptune Fire Hall, the stone keystones and stone windowsills to the Vossard block and McGuire Vossard building, and the what is it called? I forget, the hood molds, projecting hood molds, which was James' suggestion, to the McGuire Vossard building as well. So any questions, comments, additions to that final list of attributes before we move ahead with taking it to the rest of the committee? Main committee?
Looks good to me.
Okay, good. All right. So then that's all I have to report on that one. Yep.
So I guess we have to do our motion now about the draft statement.
Yep.
Okay. Does anybody wish to make a motion about the draft statement of cultural heritage value? Robert, was that you?
Yes, I'd be pleased
waving,
to make that motion. Yeah.
Waving madly. Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's no further questions or comments about it, then I guess all in favor of the motion. And that's done.
Oh.
Seeing we're on this slide, can I just ask one question about one of the pictures?
Sure. I'll try to answer. It might be more of an Andrew question.
I'm just kind of curious about that picture in the basement in the top left hand. Like what do we think that feature actually was? Was it something like is there something been demolished from there, like part of a wall been removed, or like what is that?
I don't know. I was fascinated by it as well. And I don't recall if it was between, it wasn't between the buildings. I think it was on the outer wall.
It's on the outer wall on the west end, so fronting on Pelham,
Yeah.
where Pelham Road is. Interestingly, right underneath that small single-story brick addition that's on the corner there, the one you can see the back of in the picture in the bottom right. It's very curious. I mean, it was excavated. There was a header put in. I don't know why. I don't know where it was supposed to go. I had a good look at it with our heritage mason when he was down there doing some repairs, and he was also befuddled. So,
Well, I mean, it looks like such a different kind of masonry from like the picture that's right beside it. Gosh, could it have even been a foundation for an older structure that was there at some point? I mean, it's just it looks really odd.
it's definitely curious, yeah.
So the picture that's beside it, is that what portion of the building is that under?
That's under the north wall facing St. Paul Crescent, and that's a section that we repointed earlier this year.
Huh. Wow. That almost looks like limestone or something rather than sandstone.
Yeah, I think it is. Although actually a lot of that has paint on it as well, so don't go by the coloration.
Okay. Okay, thanks. But that was my question. So I guess Andrew, we're back to you as chair.
All right.
Just before we continue, because through the chair, Holly is here, but also there is someone who is just identified by their phone number. And I don't know if that's Mark or, but they're on mute. Hi. Hello?
Yes, that's Mark.
Hi, Mark. Okay, perfect. I'll just I'll mark your name so that it appears correctly. How are you, Mark?
Good. How are you doing?
Very good.
I'm out at a job right now. I'm just finishing up.
Okay.
So
Okay,
I,
wonderful.
I have that app for Zoom on my phone. I thought I did.
Oh yeah. No worries. No worries at all. This is great. I just wanted to confirm it was you.
Yep, it's me. Thanks.
Perfect.
No offense to Mark, I thought we were being rated. That'd be much more exciting, but we're glad you're here, Mark, anyway.
Mysterious.
So we can move on to 7.2. Okay, 7.2 is the updated cultural heritage value or interest assessment for 3 Elizabeth Street, and Lauren's going to go through that as well.
Sorry, I'm just changing Mark's name and sharing my screen. So, similarly to 143, 153 St. Paul Crescent. For 3 Elizabeth Street, we reached out to the property owner, Dr. Cheel. He's very keen and interested and engaged in this idea of designating his property. And we provided him with some of the background research and set up a time to go to the site and take a look. Andrew and I went out earlier this week. Unfortunately, there was a miscommunication, and so we have rescheduled our meeting for Monday. But we will be meeting with Dr. Chill to go through the heritage attributes and the statement. With him, and just again some of the committee's questions around the fence. I was able to take some better pictures, closer pictures of the fence, including this kind of the maker mark or the manufacturer here. We think it's the Stewart something works.
Look like Metalworks, I think.
Metalworks, M-E-T, yeah. Where some probably metal. The Stewart Metalworks, Cincinnati, Ohio. So going to continue to try to track them down and see that. So I think both Andrew and I weren't sure if it was necessarily original, but it is definitely very old and contributes to the character of the property as a whole. So definitely feeling we would include that in the list of heritage attributes. Just again, wanted to give the subcommittee the opportunity to look at the heritage attribute list again. I've made the changes as discussed by the committee, and have included the low ornamental metal fence, the mature vegetation and garden style landscaping as part of the heritage attributes. So I guess any questions, comments, concerns about that list before it goes back to the main committee?
Sounds like there aren't any. Oh, Robert, did you have a question? No? Okay. It looks like we have no questions on that, so can we get a motion to I'm just reading the text here to I'll read the motion first and then people can volunteer to make the motion that the draft statement of cultural heritage value or interest in heritage attributes for 3 Elizabeth Street be accepted and that staff be directed to proceed with consulting with the property owners and present the draft SCHVIE and heritage attributes to the St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee for consideration. Anyone like to make that motion? Robert, was that a thumbs up? Oh, Holly's definitely had a waving there. Okay. So let's call it a Holly motion, Robert second, and in favor? Mark, we're not, you're not yelling at us, so we'll assume you're in favor, yes?
Yes, in favor.
Okay, so that carries five, none. We move on to item 7.3, 15 Welland Avenue research. Christian, you're going to give us an update on all your work?
And I'll just share Christian's screen here, or his presentation.
Okay. So I've basically gone ahead and I've researched all of the people who've lived in the house, all of the people that I could find, and then I've also got a bit on the architecture and on the surrounding context, and then I kind of reflect on my conclusion with the 906 evaluation. So to get started, I'll talk about the heritage of the property. If you go to the next slide, it's pretty standard for, it seems like St. Catharines, where the property was officially patented by Robert Hamilton, who seems to have owned kind of half of St. Catharines, and then it was later sold to William Merritt. Interestingly, the property was first actually patented in 1791 by Duncan Murray, who actually passed away before he could receive the official patent. And so it wasn't patented for a while. I know in 1829 about the government gave the heir of Duncan Murray a patent, but it wasn't enforceable for anyone after Hamilton. So it meant nothing. And going to the next slide. In terms of early ownership after Merritt, he sold it to George Adams, who I believe used the property for farming. And then he eventually gave it to Thomas Adams, his son. And Thomas Adams was the Welland Canal paymaster at the time. They lived in a two-story wooden frame house according to the 1961 census. And from my understanding, that's the building that I've circled in blue on the 1916 fire insurance map. There was supposedly like a farmhouse that was standing on the property up until the school board bought the property in 1919, because I have a clip from their newspaper where they're trying to sell it, but I believe that they ultimately ended up having it demolished. So if you go to the next slide, here's just the newspaper from 1919 trying to sell that wooden barn. And I'm pretty sure that's the house of Thomas Adams. So then if you go to the next slide, Thomas Adams sold the property in 1965 to George W. Pierce, who we're pretty certain is the one who constructed the property, and the property was likely built between 1865 and 1872. On the right-hand side, you can see a map that shows kind of the property, and I'll zoom into that in just a moment. In terms of who George Pierce was, he was a banker with the Niagara District Bank. And he worked there even when it became the Imperial Bank of Canada in 1871, I believe. And then that later became CIBC. So that's just kind of interesting. Then if you go to the next slide, zooms out to the full extent of this map, and then the next slide zooms in to where the property is. This map is from 1865, and I'd say it's pretty clear from what the artist was drawing that this is the house at 15 Welland. You can kind of see that central projecting tower. You can see the kind of pairs of windows on the three different sections of the building. And according to my historical maps that are like top-down plan view, there were the three buildings there, with 15 Welland being on the left. So it's pretty solid evidence that it was built before 1865 or 75, sorry. Then the next slide. A fun fact, or kind of some speculation that I had found while researching the property. You can see in the image on the left-hand side, there's kind of that extension sticking out of the property, and it was supposedly a vault. I think that's highly unlikely because why would the banker have a vault in his own house? But if you do look at the floor plan from 1989, it's kind of a very strange room. It's made of concrete on the outside. Um, and I have no idea what this could have been used for. So if you guys have any speculation, feel free to share it. As you can see, there's the newspaper clipping there. That was from 1977, and it claims that it was a vault. It could have also been built later on, though, because, yeah, if you go to the next slide, in the fire insurance map, it never shows up. And this is from 1960. So I don't think it was a vault, but who knows? Then moving on to the next slide. George Pierce died from typhoid fever in 1879. Then it was passed on to his wife, and his wife sold it in 1887 to Daniel Donahue. And kind of the Donahue and Hines families, they're the same family. In the 1891 census, Catherine Donahue or Kate Donahue owned the property and operated a boarding house. There were 6 lodgers and 8 residents. And in terms of interesting things with their family, her nephew, Walter Hines, and his son, also Walter Hines, they owned the Hines Bros livery and stables in downtown St. Catharines, and that was attached to the Lincoln Saw Works. On the next slide, I've just got an overview of the map where I found that building. And then if you zoom in, it's up here. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So the family was pretty involved in St. Catharines. Going to the next slide. As I said, there were lodgers in the house, and there were some interesting people who ended up renting out the space. In 1895, there was Vaughan Robertson. He was a civil engineer from England who was living in St. Catharines at the time. And then, more notably, in 1905, an engineer by the name of Ralph B. Hamilton leased the entire property from Catherine Donahue. He was a manager at Packard Electric and later became the president of the company. He was also really involved in St. Catharines community. He sat on the Board of Trade from 1906 to 1907. He was also in a number of clubs. I've found like an obituary from him talking about a number of things he did. And he was also part of the Imperial Munitions Board of Canada during World War I, which kind of set up the manufacturing and sale of munitions to England at the time. And around 1914, he moved back to the United States, but he was still active in kind of Canada, and he just lived at Fort Niagara. Then on the next slide, after Hamilton moved out of the property, the owners was still the Hines and Donahue family. The property sat empty for about 2 years when it was then sold to Jacob Cooperman in 1916. According to the land sale, it was like $1, but that's probably not the actual amount. It's interesting though, because Jacob Cooperman is in no way related to Walter Hines. He was born in Russia and immigrated to Canada in either 1899 or 1900. He was the founding member of the B'nai Israel congregation and one of the people who kind of pushed for the construction of the synagogue. And he also owned a clothing store in downtown St. Catharines. I found that he rented out at least one of the rooms to a carpenter by the name of Lawrence Scott in 1918, but I haven't found much information about that. And he's the one who eventually sold the property in 1919 to the school board. On the next slide, I have a newspaper article from the Standard in 1916 that says a real estate deal of considerable importance was closed when M.J. Cooperman bought the property. I've not found an M.J. Cooperman in any census records, so maybe M was for Mr., maybe it was a mistake, or maybe there's a different M.J. Cooperman as opposed to Jacob Yakov Cooperman, who I've found. And then it's also interesting that there's this newspaper article, since it says that it was incredible importance, even though in the records I only have sold for $1. So maybe there was some reason that they paid kind of under the table. Then on the right-hand side, I just have a 1916 fire insurance map the to show kind of what the area looked like at the time before the school was built. On the next slide, so the school board bought the property along with its two adjacent properties, 17 and 21 Welland, in 1919. They of course built the memorial school on top of 17 and 19 Welland, or yeah, 17 and 21. And I had found that they had offered to sell the properties on the adjacent sell the homes on the adjacent properties to be either moved or demolished. I found in the Memorial School heritage research that supposedly one of the properties was actually moved. I don't know where, and I've asked the school board if they have any records, but they don't. And then as for the other property, as well as the barn that I had mentioned was behind 15 Welland, those I believe were demolished. Then the school board, I know, was renting out the upper two floors for residents and for teachers, and they were using the main floor as their office space up until 1962 when they kind of stopped using the property. Okay. On the next slide, in 1964, they gave the property to Brock University for $1 per year on a lease. And this was to try and help Brock get set up. And so Brock used the spaces for 2 years or for 1 year as the Glenridge campus was still being built. And here's some really great photos that I found. On the next slide, after Brock moved out, the school board sold the property and it ended up passing hands quite a number of times. But in terms of what it was being used for, I know it was used for a daycare at some point in 1966. But on the next slide, the trail kind of goes cold for about a decade in terms of what it was being used for. But then in 1976, it was sold to Donald Bergman. He had it extensively renovated and then opened up kind of like a club. He never intended for it to necessarily be a restaurant or a club, but it ended up being considered a restaurant, and it was therefore operating illegally because it was in a residential zoned area and didn't have a license to be operating. On the next slide, I have a whole bunch of newspaper articles from the time kind of documenting his struggle to have this club in St. Catharines. And it's a really interesting read. It's a really interesting restaurant or club that he had going on. Some fun things that I found were like people were surprised that you couldn't smoke in the restaurant, which seems totally normal today. He ended up having to charge memberships. There were prices for the food, but they were actually suggested donations instead. And unfortunately, eventually he ran out of money to be able to support this. And so kind of in the later part of 1977, I believe the club ended up closing, even though he managed to work his way around some of the legal reasons that he couldn't operate it. Then on the next slide, he ended up selling the property in 1981. And then once again, the owners kind of passed it around for the next decade. I'm not really sure what the uses were, but I do know that in 1986, it was being used by Dr. Cedra, who's a cosmetic surgeon here in St. Catharines, still operating today, just not in 15 Welland. In around 1989, a new owner bought the property and had undergone renovations. And then in 1990, that's when Picasso's opened up. On the next slide, I have just kind of the elevations and floor plans from the 1989 renovations. I thought they were pretty cool. You can go on to the next slide as well. And on this slide, again, you can see that kind of vault area that I have no idea what it was used for, but it's quite interesting. From this, we can also see the upper two floors were still being used each as an apartment, as well as that back structure was also being used as an apartment, while the main floor was kind of used as offices or retail. Then going on to the next slide, here's just kind of the progression of the property from the photos that I do have. Sometime in the 1980s is when that front porch was removed from the property. I'm not entirely sure when that was though. Then as I said, in 1990, Picasso's moved in. They had renovations done in 2000 and 2003. You can see the property there in 2012. Then in the next slide, Picasso's moved out. I'm not entirely sure why. They moved out in 2014 and it became Body Max Fitness, which you can see there in 2016. Body Max Fitness moved out in 2016 and then it was replaced by Picasso's once again, along with Paula's Elegant Bride, a bridal store. And in 2020, Paula's Elegant Bride moved out, but I think a different bridal store called Love Story Bridal moved in. And today it's now the bottom floor is used by Picasso's. As of April this year, actually, there's a new little cafe in the corner. I went to check it out at lunch today. And then on the second floor, Love Story Bridal just moved out recently, and it's currently being listed on realtor.ca for rent. Then on the next slide, I just have some photos from Realtor. Unfortunately, not my drone photo, but gives you a sense of what's happened to the interior. When I went to check it out today, the interior is totally renovated and modern, but the exterior is still quite beautiful, I have to say. On the next slide, I'll quickly just go over kind of the architecture. On this slide, you can see the extensions out the back. So we know that the house was built around 1865 to 1872. That's the main structure. Then there's two back extensions, which are shown in the 1916 fire insurance map, but I've also found a map supposedly from 1911 that shows the rear structures on there as well. And I'm fairly confident that they were built after the main structure, but probably around the time that the Donahue and Hines family moved in, and they might have been used for the lodgers that Catherine Donahue was renting out to. But in 2000, some of the renovations that was done basically completely redid that yellow part. So I don't think there's any historical any historic part of that that's left. And then in 2003, they added an extension on the side. And as I mentioned, in 1980 is about when they removed that front porch. Then going on to the next slide, I just have some photos. You can see the back side of it, kind of the extensions there. Going on to the next slide, I guess some things I wanted to mention were the brick used in the back structure versus the main building are different. So that's a telltale sign they weren't built at the same time. And then also looking at some of the windows, I feel like they're actually probably original, a couple of them at least, which is super cool. Going on to the next slide is you can see this really cool keystone that's hidden behind the sign. And then also there's the patio for the cafe there. Can go on to the next slide. I just have more photos of the site to give you an idea. Personally, I think that the historical elements are really well preserved. And I mean, you can see that and judge for yourself. Going on to the next slide, just more photos. We can keep going. Then quickly on the surrounding contexts, if we go on to the next slide, Of course, right south of it was the Merritt Estate, which was kind of subdivided and sold in 1969. That should say 1869, my bad. Which is around the same time that the house was built, 1865 to 1872. And so the Queen Street Heritage District, a number of the buildings there were also kind of being built at the same time that this property was built. Next to it, of course, is the Memorial School, which is kind of at that culminating end of Queen Street. Then the buildings on the other side of 15 Welland were built in between 1911, 1916, and 1923. Interestingly, with the Memorial School, when researching that property, the architect had designed it to kind of reflect the other buildings in the area, the historical buildings. And at that time, it was mainly 15 Welland and the other property 2023 Welland. And he had designed the building to have a similar setback. So if you go to the next slide, you can really see how, as 15 Welland is kind of the oldest building in that area that's still standing, you can really see how the buildings around it were built to match that setback, with the school on the right being set back quite a ways from the street, and the buildings on the left having kind of that angle towards 15 Welland. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Then going on to the next slide, you can see again that setback from Memorial School looking at 15 Welland, and then also there's 9 Welland on the other side, just to give you an idea of the buildings around. On the next slide, I kind of looked at some buildings that reminded me of 15 Welland. So at 183 King Street, there's this building. It's a little more Italianate, and that's how it's described in its heritage report, heritage designation. It was built in 1868, which is around the same time actually as 15 Welland, which is quite interesting. And I had kind of thought maybe the architect might be the same. But looking into it, he is a famous architect, but I haven't been able to find anything that says 15 Welland. I haven't, in fact, been able to find any architect for 15 Welland. Then there are a couple Second Empire homes on Academy Street, but I think the building at 15 Welland really encompasses kind of that Second Empire style, and it's quite distinct. And so from that, I'm kind of arguing that the building is quite unique in St. Catharines. And then 157 King Street, I had found a historic photo of it. It was demolished in 1975, and it does kind of look like 15 Welland. Unfortunately, it is no longer here. But I thought it was interesting. So then going on to the next slide, I just want to quickly run through my thoughts on the 906 evaluation, and I'd love to hear your feedback too. Going on to the next slide is for design and physical value. As I was kind of mentioning a few moments ago, I believe that this property is quite rare for St. Catharines, quite rare in the neighborhood, and it's very unique. It very much encompasses that Second Empire design, and I believe for that reason that it can meet that first criteria for design physical value for the 906 evaluation. Then does it display a high degree of craftsmanship? I think it's very well preserved. I was wondering kind of what your feedback was on the property, and if you agree that it could be argued that it does display a high degree of craftsmanship. If anyone has any comments, or I can keep going.
I would
I guess
think
oh,
that it does.
okay.
I think it would
That's
qualify.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I'm leaning too. I think a lot of the historical elements are really well preserved. I think it's a really impressive building. Then for the last point there, does it demonstrate a high degree of technical or scientific achievement? Not necessarily, I don't think. So for that one, it'd be a no. Then going on to the next slide is the historical value. And I'd say that it has direct association with the school board as well as Brock University. And for that reason, I think it's quite interesting. And then when talking to Lauren about this, we had also mentioned that the owner, can't remember his first name, but last name Hamilton, who was the president of the Packard Electric Company, could also be associated with this property. And then does it yield the information about a community or culture? Not really, I don't think, but you're welcome to say anything if you think it does. And then does it demonstrate or reflect the work of an architect or a builder? I haven't been able to find anything. I have a feeling that there probably was quite a prominent architect who designed this property, given its scale and its kind of impressive nature. But like I said, that at least I haven't been able to find any of it, any information on that. But it would be interesting to know. Then going on to the next slide, is it important in defining, maintaining, or supporting the character of an area? I'm not really sure which way to lean on this one. The buildings surrounding it are historical and they date back quite a long time, both similarly to the building at 15 Welland, but also 15 Welland kind of predates some of the immediate structures around it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one. Then is it physically or visually linked to its surroundings? I'd argue that it is linked historically to the memorial school, since the school board bought both the properties in the same time and they've kept 15 Welland around. And they also, when the architect designed the memorial school, was very much considering the design of 15 Welland while he was making his designs. Then finally, is it a landmark? I'd argue yes. This quote right there is from the Ontario, what's it called, Heritage Toolkit. And I'd argue that 15 Welland is a recognizable feature that really, really stands out. It's really unique. It's a beautiful Second Empire house in an area that doesn't really have any Second Empire buildings. It's significantly larger than a number of the homes around it, which are mostly 1.5 to 2 stories, whereas this one is 3. And so I'd argue that it very much is a land. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of the 906 criteria.
Thank you, Christian. That was very, very well done and really informative. It is a really cool building, and I think you made a strong case for 906 for qualifying under 906. I can help you actually with one piece of your history because the properties I'm going to be talking about are right adjacent to it on the other side of Thomas Street, and I encountered an article in the newspaper from November 10th, 1864, in the Evening Journal, and it talks about how the Pierce House under construction was heavily damaged by a storm. So it was under construction in November of 1864, and after being damaged by the storm, would have been completed presumably fairly soon afterwards. So I'll send you that that reference. But
That's really amazing. Yeah.
And the other thing, just in terms of the vault, I've seen a couple of houses in Niagara where that actually have vaults in them. Both belonged at one point to bankers. If you're not sure if it's a vault, go see it, because when you see one, it's unmistakable that it really couldn't be anything else other than that. So it's not untoward in the fact that that Pierce was a banker is, makes sense.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks.
Anyone have questions or comments for Christian? Brian?
I wonder if that vault at some point might have been actually like a covered side entryway to the house that was later, bricked in somehow. A couple of things that you mentioned in your presentation, Christian. You're talking about that dollar deed to Cooperman. I mean, this is just a minor point, but when they used to do abstracting for the land registry, um, for some reason the front sheet of a property deed, they would only put down $1 for the prices being paid. But if you flip through the document, you'll actually find a schedule hidden away inside that will give the actual purchase price. And when they used to abstract the information from the deed into the abstract index books, we were always told the front sheet governs. So if the front sheet said $1, that's what we had to put down, even though the document further along might have said 15,000 or something like that. So to get that actual price, you'd have to look at the actual deed and see that. As far as Mr. Hamilton goes, with the Packard Electric Company, I wonder if that's something that we could mention, that that company later branched into car manufacturing.
Yeah, for sure. And
So
that's
it's
pretty significant
yeah,
in,
so it's really
yeah.
related to the automotive industry in St. Catharines. So that's I think a major significant point that we should mention. Now some of the later owners that you mentioned, is I sort of looked at the title search for this one as well. Did you find Messieurs Argetou and Attic in the title search?
That's a good question. I mostly focused on the use when it came to the later half of the 20th century. Ada John, sorry, can you say the names again?
The one name is Attic, Attic, and the other name is Argetou, Arghittu.
I found Argetou, not
Yeah,
Attic.
yeah, because they bought the property as partnership property, and I think they bought it from. Did they buy it from Brock or from the school board? Because
No.
some of those other names that you were mentioning, I don't think really showed up as owners in the chain of title.
Yeah, so um yeah, I focused mostly on the use as opposed to who was actually owning it because a lot of the time between Brock and Donald Bergman, um, it was owned by like holding companies, at least from my understanding. And I'm honestly not even sure if Bergman owned it. He agreed, I'm pretty sure he did, in trust. The what I've got in my notes is C&M Financial Consultants agreed to sell to Donald Bergman in trust for $88,000. Um,
Yeah, I can send you my notes for the latter part of that title search again, just to confirm that we're doing the right story on the house.
yeah, that would be good. I do, for at least for Bergman, I do have like the newspaper clippings, and that's where I got like the uses of the building. In terms of Arga 2, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. He bought it from, hang on, he bought it from Iris Collada, and she bought it from some other people who bought it from some other people. It seems like the owners changed hands like a good 6 times
Right,
between Brock and him.
right.
Not more
Well,
actually,
if you
but
got all that information, then you probably got the notes that I originally sent to Lauren.
oh, okay.
So okay,
Yeah,
okay,
he was provided with that big long, yeah, yeah,
okay.
to build from. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, those are my only concerns. Was I mean, if we want to find out how much Cooperman paid for the property, I mean, I can always go into the land registry records and take a look at that deed and just see what he actually might have paid for it. Um,
Yeah,
and just to make sure that we mention the importance of Packard.
yes, for sure.
That's wonderful, Christian. So interesting and so many kind of like neat little eras that you've discovered for this building. I was thinking maybe eh, for the motion, if the designation if the subcommittee would like to kind of either agree with or um, be consistent with the 906 as it's been completed so far, and have Christian continue his work putting together a formal 906 evaluation and have a stab at a statement and heritage attributes to bring back to you guys next month.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay,
Does that
sounds
sound good
great.
to you, Christian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I just had a quick comment just to make about the building, if I may. Okay.
please go
Um,
ahead on.
I went to this salon, Mario Argudi salon, for probably 25 years. He's done my hair. I go to another salon now, but I've been going there for years, and it's quite a fabulous place inside. Um, and it's interesting, even on his Picasso's hair salon website, he has a story about how he got the name Picasso. He had gone to the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo to visit, and he had seen some Picasso paintings, and there were some beautiful paintings of women with gorgeous hair, and he decided to name it Picasso's, and he wanted it to become the the art gallery of hair, so his salon inside, and he does on his website. I just looked at it briefly that he does mention that it was a former Brock University building, which is really cool. But it's amazing inside the building. It's a fabulous place. And at the back, where that room is, where you're thinking it's a vault, we sat there for many, many hours putting color on our hair in the back part there. So, and it's neat. Upstairs with the bridal salons, and yeah, he had different rooms upstairs for different women's services, and yeah, it's a cool building. And then the story was interesting, Christian, about the Chestnut Tree Club. I'm wondering if, like, at the back when you would park, there were some big, beautiful trees, um, and then the chestnuts would bing on your vehicle, right? So there may be still chestnut trees around that school area.
Yeah, maybe. I know the
Oh,
building got its name after a big chestnut tree that was in front of the house at the time. It was pretty interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
yeah, great work,
And
great research. Thank you.
Mhm.
I had a question then. You said that you had sat in that kind of vault area. Would you say that it reminded you of a vault?
Well, there was this, it's hard to tell. Like, it's like a dark room, and yeah, it's lots of mirrors, and it's closed in. Maybe we'll have to go for a tour sometime, poke around.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll take a stab at wording this motion then with the additions. So we're looking for a motion that the discussion regarding the ongoing research and upcoming deadlines regarding 15 Walnut Avenue be received, and request that Christian Zollner, is that pronounced that correctly? Prepare a draft statement of cultural heritage value or interest and 906 evaluation. Does that motion sound about right? Anyone like to make that motion? Moved by Brian, seconded by Robert, it looks like, in favor. And that carries 4-0. We lost Mark somewhere along the way there, so congratulations, Christian. You just got more work on your plate. Now they're never going to let you out of there. Next item is item 7.4. Lauren, would it be possible that we reverse the next two items? Because a lot of what I'm talking about is going to really add it. You were thinking the same thing? Okay.
I think it's a wonderful, yeah. I think that's a very good approach. Yeah.
All right. So we'll skip that item 7. Well, it says 7.3, but I think it should be 7.5. which is the information about 1 Welland Avenue. And let me switch to my notes here. Okay, so my slideshow's not quite as fancy as Christian's and not as detailed, but I wanted to give just a bit of an overview of what I've been working on. Originally with Louis, I started looking at 1 Welland Avenue because that's the property that was on the registry. But in researching that property, inherently you learn about the properties around it, and I came to the conclusion that the history of that one property is very linked to some of the ones around it, and that some of the other ones associated with it have probably an equally good case for conservation. So I kind of expanded my report, which is getting close to being finished, to include a group of properties, and I wanted to sort of go through my thought process in that a little bit. Next slide. One. So the property falls in lots 19 and 20 of Concession 5 in Grantham Township. You see in the sketch there, Welland Avenue representing the road allowance between Concession 5 and 6, and the green lines that run through the corner property there being the dividing line between lots 19 and 20. And the early history is very, very similar to what Christian just went through, so I won't rehash it too much. Duncan Murray, Robert Hamilton Jr. and Sr., William Hamilton Merritt, and then ultimately George Adams in 1825. Next slide. And it was the Adams Farm, the site of the Adams Farm from 1825 till 1873. I included that newspaper clipping there because that's from the Evening Journal, February 14th, 1871. And the Thomas Adams house was destroyed by a fire at that point. And it's interesting because it's an instance of how people reacted to an old house being destroyed. In the article, it's referred to as one of the oldest houses in town, having been built before the War of 1812 by George Adams. And now it would have been, I think, not necessarily on the same corner that we're on, or not on the northeast side, but I'm not entirely sure where his house was. But and of course, George Adams was paymaster for the Welland Canal and a number of other things. When he died in 1845, it passed to Thomas Adams, and then when Thomas Adams died early in 1872, it passed to his children, George Adams and Julia Pierce. Pierce will be a familiar name because Julia Adams married George W. Pierce, who Christian was talking about. So Julia W. Pierce was the son-in-law of Thomas Adams. Next slide. So following the death of Thomas Adams and some legal wrangling, which I'll spell out more in the report, a portion of the estate was turned into the Thomas Adams Estate Plan number 53, which was signed in 1873 and filed. That's incorrect. It's 1875, not 1876. My apologies. And what that plan did was divide up this section of the property into 69 lots. You can see lots 1 through 4 fronting on Welland Avenue, and then the even numbered lots fronted on Ontario Street to the west, and the odd numbered lots fronted on Thomas Street to the right. And down in the corner there is where the property that Christian was talking about would be, which was known as the Pierce Homestead, which was built prior to this plan coming into place. Next slide. So once the plan was put in place, the sale of the lots began in 1873. You see here an article from George Adams and George Pierce, representing himself and his wife, beginning to sell the lots and the terms under which they were selling them. I made note in my notes there of there was a mortgage taken in 1880 of $2,400 on a number of the lots that had remained unsold. That mortgage was assigned to Edmund Pinch in 1884, and in 1891, the remaining lots began to be sold under power of sale. So clearly, for some reason, they were defaulting on that mortgage, one of many mortgages, which this was the one that was seized under power of sale. Next slide. So here you see the section that I'm focusing on. This is lots 1 through 7 in the plan. So the 4 fronting on Welland Avenue, and then 1 property on Ontario Street, and three on Thomas Street. Right now, that amounts to currently there are 9 different structures on there on 11 different. I think it's 11 different, no, 10 different municipal lots, and that's out of the original 7 subdivision lots. And the reason I'm focusing on those 7, if you go to the next slide, is that those are the 7 lots there that were purchased by Albert and Catherine Pay between 1891 and 1897. The 7 lots being purchased in 3 transactions, all under power of sale during that time period. So they purchased those 7 lots, and they built their own home on lot 4, which is the earliest of the structures in that group. Albert, where is it? I had a couple notes here. One moment. Yeah. Albert Pay was a fairly significant individual. He was the son of William Pay, who was a prominent builder. It's interesting that Christian mentioned not knowing who the architect was of 15 Welland, because I've been very curious about this. Between the Pay family and his wife Catherine was a Boyle, and there was a number of connections with some very prominent builders and architects of the time. Everybody from including Pay himself, but Nicholson Senior, the builder, Nicholson Junior, the architect. There's an article about William B. Allen showing up and speaking at the housewarming of one of these when one of these houses was constructed, which leads us to wonder, who of that group may have been involved with the construction of any of these houses, and any one of their involvement would add to the significance of them. But I haven't encountered anything yet to demonstrate that. But Albert Pay himself was a prolific and enterprising farmer. He was also a partner in the Tittering and Pay company, which shipped fruit to Buffalo, Toronto, Winnipeg, and elsewhere. He was a councillor, deputy reeve, and reeve of Grantham Township, councillor of Lincoln County, the St. Catharines alderman, a list of other accolades and so on. But he's most well known for having been the city clerk for St. Catharines for 20 years. And he and his wife built their first home on lot 4. They subsequently sold that home and built a house on lot 3 next door, and then eventually sold that house and built their third home in this group on lot 7. So there are 3 houses here that are directly related to them, and they're actually 3 of the nicer homes among this group. If we can go to the next page. I'm going to go through them in chronological order. 7 Welland Avenue, circa 1891 to 93. As you said, lot 4 in the estate plan. Some of the significant residents were Albert and Catherine Pay. I talked about them. Wesley and Mary Salter. Wesley was the principal of the St. Catharines Collegiate Institute, and he was also worked for the Ontario Educational Association, serving as its president, developing curriculum for secondary schools throughout Ontario. He was also heavily involved in a number of social organizations in the St. Catharines area, as was Mary. For example, she was vice president of the YWCA for a period of time. Um, once Wesley passed away, the house was sold to and inhabited by their son Wesley and his wife. Sorry, Wilson and his wife. Wilson Salter's someone I've never actually heard of before, and he's a really interesting fellow. He was a graduate of the University of Toronto School of Architecture, but he was also a very skilled artist. And his wife Kathleen was an artist as well. But he served in the military during World War II with the Royal Canadian Corps of Engineers. And there's a very interesting obituary written about him in the Ottawa Citizen when he died, talking about his role in the Second World War. He was instrumental in working on the top secret Pluto project, which stands for Pipeline Under the Ocean, which was a project that was begun 2 years ahead of the Normandy invasion. And what it did essentially was take a small village on the coast of Britain, and they gutted the cottages and outfitted them with huge pumps, so that after D-Day they ran a flexible pipeline from the English coast to pump fuel to supply the forces in in uh, in Normandy, because fuel was in very short supply in the mainland at that time, and he was instrumental in that. He's also was considered a master of camouflage, and using his artistic and architectural talents, he was very skilled at disguising the movement of troops and equipment, either hiding troops that were there or making troops appear to be there that actually weren't. And late in the war, he was stationed in Holland, where he set up a school for soldiers, teaching them skills to build their own homes when they came home. He was ultimately promoted to the rank of major and was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire by King George VI for his services during the war, which is a pretty significant accolade. He returned to St. Catharines after the war and established an architectural practice, purchasing the home in 1946 from his father. He was president of the St. Catharines Rotary Club and a co-founder of the Rodman Hall Arts Center. So again, very significant participation in the community. As an architect, he was commissioned by the Government of Canada to design the Laura Secord building that stands at 32 Church Street. And that opened in 1960, and the St. Catharines Standard called it a notable addition to the downtown business section. The family subsequently moved to Beamsville and then to Ottawa, where he was the vice president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, and also president of the Ottawa Watercolor Society. And apparently you can see several of his watercolors hanging in Ottawa City Hall. So again, a significant St. Catharines individual who I had never heard of before. When the house was sold to the Salter family, it was known as Sunny Lawn, so it had the name Sunny Lawn. In 1951, it was purchased by Dr. Boyce Shirk, who opened up a medical practice there. That's the point at which it ceased to become a residence. And in 1955, expanding his practice, Dr. Shirk sold it to Michael Zaritsky, who is again another prominent individual associated with the property. He was, in addition to being having his own practice, he was the president of the Lincoln County Medical Association, and he also served in the Canadian Army Medical Corps during World War II. And an interesting side note is that the Zaritsky's son John is a National Newspaper Award-winning journalist and Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker. So again, another very prominent local individual, although he never lived there. It was his father's medical practice. But now that building, as I said, was never a residence. Again, it's been a medical office ever since. And today it's the site of the Hope Pharmacy and the St. Paul Clinic, which offers medically assisted treatment for people with addiction issues. And I note that the property's been on the market now for several months as being for sale. The few trees around it, so it's hard to get a good photo of it, but certainly an interesting and impressive building in its own right. So we move on to the next slide. in around 1898. The Pays sold a lot to John Wells, who built this home there. It's been since, in my estimation, a little bit defaced with some aluminum siding. However, if you go back a few years on Google Street View, you'll see there's a very handsome brick house underneath there. John Wells is associated with the Welland Vale Works, where he was the foreman there for many years, and um, lived quite nearby. And then another individual of significance was Gerhard Epp, who was an immigrant from Russia. He became a Mennonite minister, and he helped found the. Let me just find the name here. Founder of the Scott Street Mennonite Brethren Church, which is still there. And subsequently, he and his wife took up positions at Bethesda Home in Vineland, which is a long-standing treatment center there. So they were very involved there. All right, next slide. 5 Welland Avenue circa 1901. In 1901, that's when the Pay family sold Sunny Lawn, and they built this house immediately next door. So they were the original builders and residents of this house. Talked about them. The house was subsequently owned and occupied by James Waterhouse. Waterhouse was the secretary and director of the Engineering and Machine Works of Canada Limited, which in addition to their manufacturing, they were heavily involved in the production of munitions for the Canadian government during World War One. And James Waterhouse was also a multiple term member of the St. Catharines Board of Education, and they lived there for some time. And then they sold the property to Vernon MacLeod, who was a prominent banker in St. Catharines. He and his wife were also very heavily involved with the Canadian Red Cross during World War II, and they subsequently sold the property, but both prominent individuals there. Next slide. The next property that was built was 11 Thomas Street, and this is on part of Lot 7. Lot 7 was divided into 2 lots with 11 Thomas Street and then 9 Thomas Street built on them in quick succession. Both are more modest houses compared to the other ones in this group, but the notable residents of this property would be Frank Jarvis. Frank Jarvis was a long-standing member of the St. Catharines Police Department, starting first as an officer, working his way up to sergeant, and eventually to deputy chief of police for the city. If you wonder why you have to slow down when crossing through a school zone, you can thank Frank Jarvis. That was his invention, and he also referred to his most proud accomplishment as being bringing Elmer the safety elephant into the schools in St. Catharines. So if you experienced Elmer when you were growing up, as I did, then you can thank Sergeant Frank Jarvis for that. And this is where he lived. Subsequently, the home was owned by Jenny and Martin Moy, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She was the long time president of the Salvation Army in St. Catharines, and her husband was a longtime parks planner for the city of St. Catharines, and he was instrumental in designing the layout of J.C. Gardens and other significant parks in St. Catharines. Next. Immediately beside that is 9 Thomas Street, again, a modest structure. It was owned initially by John Russell. who owned the Russell Machine Company nearby, a fairly productive enterprise for a short period of time. The property went through a number of short-term owners. One of them was Archibald McKinnon, the McKinnon Dash and Metalworks Company being quite nearby. He was the younger brother of the founder, and if you're familiar with the McKinnon Company, it's now a massive global enterprise that started out in a little hardware store on St. Paul Street in St. Catharines. So he was a piece of that, and he owned the property for about 2 years, I believe. And then finally, this is an interesting one. Marilyn Walker, a very well-known philanthropic force in Niagara and St. Catharines. This is also a challenging one because this was her childhood home, but she at some point, probably in her teenage years, became a ward of another family. And if you check her marriage announcements and so on, her maiden name is given as this other family, and her parents are listed as her guardians rather than her natural parents. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but when you look at a situation like this, you have to wonder, maybe there's a story there that the family wouldn't want told. So I don't know how you navigate things like that, but certainly her association with the house adds some significance to it in my estimation. Next page. This is 180 Ontario Street. This is lot 6 on Ontario Street. This is in behind One Welland Avenue. This is a very impressive house. One thing to note about this one was when we were doing our looking at these properties to add them to the registry, the owner of this house objected to being added to the registry. They were not in favor of it. However, this house itself does have some significance. It's a an impressive house with a lot of character. So a couple of the prominent residents are William and Margaret Ireland. They both were heavily involved in education, coming to St. Catharines when William was appointed an examiner of public school teachers by the Lincoln County Council, and he served in that position for the rest of his life, a county school inspector. Although he died in 1917, a little bit prematurely. Nevertheless, his wife Margaret continued to be very dedicated to education. She was the municipal education secretary of the St. Catherine's chapter of the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire, and she was a 4-time elected member of the Board of Education of St. Catharines, only the second woman to be on the Board of Education in St. Catharines, and very, very significant. And clearly the family's focus on education paid off because they have had two sons who became doctors, and one daughter who became a nurse at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and another daughter who became a lawyer. And that feat was rare enough for its day that when she got married, her wedding announcement read "Woman Lawyer Marries." So that was it was worth mentioning in her wedding announcement, apparently. And then subsequently, they sold the house to George Steinhoff. Steinhoff was an electrical contractor who grew his practice into a large store. If you look around in that sort of mid 1900s, you'll see many advertisements for Steinhoff's. There's a big concern for a period of time. Steinhoff Electric, sorry, is what it was called. Next page. And that takes us then to One Welland Avenue, which, although is very prominent, is one of the later houses built of this group. Interestingly, it was built around 1906. Some of the significant residents are Herbert Eckert, who was the son of William Eckert, the proprietor of the very well-known Star Music Store on St. Paul Street, and Herbert eventually became his business partner in that venture before the family subsequently moved to Buffalo. Actually, they moved to Toronto first and rented the house and then they moved to Buffalo. The house was subsequently bought by George Sherwood, and if we're buying groceries in St. Catharines in the mid 1900s, you would likely have gone to Sherwood's, which was a multi-location groceries chain. It was started by George's father, who had a small grocery in Port Dalhousie, which George, after training as a pharmacist and working in Michigan for some years, came back, took over the store. He was married to Florence May Nicholson, who was the daughter of Edwin Nicholson, who I mentioned earlier, a very significant local builder, and the sister of Arthur Nicholson, the renowned architect. And he ran a very successful business for a number of years, and they lived in the house for quite some time as well. Next one. 7 Thomas Street. This is the third of the 3 houses built by and inhabited by Albert and Catherine Pay. We talked about their significance. This is a very impressive house. I mentioned as well as list of significant residents, Frederick and Eliza Boyle. They were involved in a number of philanthropic enterprises. However, I mentioned them as much because they were Eliza Boyle was Catherine Pay's niece, and so there's a 70+ year family continuity in this house for that family, and it was subsequently owned by a number of went through a lot of ownership changes after that. Next. The last of the houses built among this group is 5 Thomas Street, and this was built on the rear section of lots 3 and 4, which are the 2 fronting on Welland. When the Pays sold those properties, they retained some of the land in the back of each of those lots, and it became the side yard when they were living at 7 Thomas Street. It was subsequently subdivided, and another property was built there. This house would have been built then between 1923 and 1926. It was owned by John and Ella Dawson. John Dawson was a foreman at the R.H. Smith and Company Saw Works. He was extremely well known for the rose bushes he had on his previous property on Ontario Street, and because of them, he was made an honorary director of the St. Catharines Horticultural Society. He was also director of the YMWCA, and his wife Ella was director of the Protestant Orphans Home nearby as well. The house was subsequently owned by Charles Curley, who worked on the building of the 3rd Welland Canal, and the 4th Welland Canal, and when that was completed, he was appointed to manage the nearby Canal Gate Yard, and that's why they moved to this property. So their association was with the Welland Canal, and then their son-in-law was Clifford Healy, who's a well-known local St. Catharines photographer. And I believe that is it. So those are the properties, and that's why I kind of expanded my research from one house to a group of them.
That was fascinating how they're all intertwined and like how they've affected the whole city, and it's just every house has this like special connection to the city, and it's
That was the thing. They were all interconnected, and you start to see the social network between the people who live there, and it overlaps to 15 Welland and other nearby properties as well. And you kind of have to go on from the one house, but at the same time, it's hard to figure out where to stop, because I'm sure I could have gone further down the block. But
yeah, you definitely get a sense of like the society that was happening at the time and over the years, in the community too. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah.
So the report will be hopefully finished soon, but I'm already at 65 pages, and I just found something new that I have to put in. So, Brian?
So after doing all this extra research in addition to One Welland Ave, is the intention to include all these other properties in with the designations as well, or is this just secondary information for us?
I think that's a choice that the committee's gonna have to make. I think there definitely are some there that will fairly easily meet the criteria, the 906 criteria. And then there are others that won't. I mean, 5 Thomas, I don't think necessarily would, but I think you could make a case for several of them. I think 7 Thomas Street should definitely get some consideration. 7 Welland and 5 Welland and 1 Welland.
Yeah,
180
I mean,
Ontario's off the table, but
all of those pay houses certainly would be, because of the name, it has such significance. I mean,
yeah. And it definitely helps that their 3 houses are among the 3 of the more, nicely built and so on.
but I mean, it's a fascinating bit of research that you did. I mean, I commend you for it.
Thank you. Well, you see why I got sucked into it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the best feeling though, and the best experience when doing research, and when you can follow these little breadcrumbs and discover this whole world that you never knew was there, even though you pass by the buildings all the time. So, yeah.
Discovering those stories, I think, is what makes it compelling. But part of it for me why I got drawn into it was I was looking at this and I was sort of really appreciating the interconnectedness of it. But some of these houses are ones I know are never going to get designated. And I just thought, maybe sometimes the only preservation we can do is to record this information. So I kind of allowed myself to go a little further just because I thought if this is all we do to protect it is to preserve these stories, then,
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we can do,
Yeah. And I think that's kind of like my response when you said, "Oh, I'm going to continue on with this research," is that then we always have that on file, and it's always there. And especially, if as we're trying to kind of build up our relationship more with the museum, making sure that this research and this reporting is on file with them as well, so that other people in the community are able to use it for whatever purposes they might want to use it. I think that's very valuable. Yeah.
It should also go to the special collections room at the library, because they've got all their building files that are, arranged by street. So, that might be another, good place to deposit this material.
Yeah. There's so much that we have on our server, and there's so much the museum has, there's so much the library has, and kind of strengthening those relationships and being able to share that information more freely, I think is definitely a long-term goal. Yeah.
And when you're researching and you can build on research someone else has done, then it makes the job that much quicker, for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm just gonna jump in for a sec. My dream would be for if we had a website where it was like a map and you could click on almost any property in the city and be able to get all this historical information. Like we've compiled so much information about so many properties, and there's so much information that gets like Lauren and I used to work at ASI where we would produce and obviously Brian works at ASI too, obviously. And so like we produce all this work and all this research and everything goes into these reports. And oftentimes those reports, they get submitted for good reasons and they get submitted for projects and whatnot, but then they kind of just get left there, and the information that's in them, and the amount of time and effort that goes into them doesn't get out to the public, right? And so if there was a way to make sure that that happens, that information was able to even just be teased out of that report and put somewhere public would be fantastic. And I mean, that's a huge job to do, but what a great repository that would be if we ever were able to do something like that, right? So
There are ways to do that, and actually we at the homestead we applied for some funding in partnership with Brock University and Willowbank for a project like that, smaller in scope, and we didn't get the funding, but so it was sort of hard to justify the people hours it would have taken to do it. But there are ways of doing it. Just need a little bit of financial backing to get it done. So if there's a senior project manager who's interested in something like that, they should give me a call.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if Adrian was here right now, he'd probably be like super excited about that idea, but also in the back of his head, he'd be like, "Oh no,
Oh no.
that's a massive project to have to try to figure out how to do, right? Uh, like you need the manpower and the time and the resource. Like it all has to add up and kind of match up at the right time, right? So,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, it's
But to have it in mind as a long-term goal, I think is important. I think Adrian and I have already been having conversations about sharing reporting between us. And I think Brian's point about the library, and as we start to build that repository, the structures will come, I hope. Yeah. Mhm.
That's the main thing, is making sure it's accessible when the work's done, and as many people who can use it have access to it as possible.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think the other part too is, I mean, we know this as the, people that are in heritage one, like you can't designate everything, unfortunately. Like it's just not, it's not feasible, right? But every property does have kind of an interesting story to it, right? And so making sure that those stories still get out there, I think is really important, even if the physical, tangible element of it maybe isn't able to live on. Um, like all the names you mentioned, like all the connections and whatnot, like those are all names that are synonymous with St. Catharines in a lot of ways, right? Like some of those last names,
Mhm.
um, and to kind of lose that would be unfortunate, right? So
And really, was just scratching the surface. The way
yeah.
those names are interrelated, and the first several people that they sold properties to were in some way, shape, or form related or involved with the family, or it shows you how as I said, the social networks work, and how,
Mhm.
you know.
The one thing I didn't catch, Andrew, and I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not, was so Pei was one of the architects, I think, right? If I'm not mistaken. Was that right? Or
Not an architect. He was the son of a builder,
oh,
William.
okay.
But the circles they moved in were pretty amazing. William Pay, his father William Pay was one of the people who spoke and gave a toast at Thomas Rodman Merritt's 50th wedding anniversary. You know what I mean? Like these were well connected
Yeah. Well,
people.
when I was thinking, I was like, I wonder if like if you were to ask like what's the most prominent building they built, right? Like or were they strictly a residential, like working on residential properties one up? But like do we know of any other buildings in the city that were built by that group? And that might help to flush out some of the arguments about like historical significance, right? Like is it associated with a builder that's important to the city?
Mhm.
I don't know how to do that necessarily because the information might not be readily available, but like just curious.
That's the
I,
troubling part of it, is hard to know, and they knew a lot of those people, so it leads you to think, well, who might have been involved with,
Yeah.
they built three very nice homes for themselves. Who was involved in that? But I haven't found anything to make those connections.
Yeah, and sometimes you can, I mean, even just style, right, is one of those things where you're not going to be able to pin it down exactly that somebody designed this building and this building, unless you know definitively, but maybe there's some stylistic elements. And I'm thinking back to uh, is it Sidney Badgley, who in St. Catharines, like he kind of got his start here, but he ultimately ends up designing Massey Hall, right?
Mhm.
But a few of his buildings that he's done in St. Catharines all have very similar like brickwork. The like just the way he did his cornices and stuff like that and the brickwork, it all kind of like you can see he's building an idea like as he goes. And if there's architects like that that have similar kind of I don't know, they just have similar type of flourishes, right? That they maybe incorporate into the designs. And maybe Pay's houses aren't quite as, ornate, but maybe there's elements to it that where you can see, oh yeah, there's this here and this here and this here. And, maybe you connect the dots that way as well. I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely, and you also don't want to assume, right? Like I mentioned, that William B. Allen showed up and spoke at one of the housewarmings, and you think, okay, well, that's significant.
Hmm.
But his um William Pay and Edwin Nicholson both apprenticed under James Dugan, who was a very prominent builder. Well, Allen was Dugan's son-in-law and worked for him as well. So they likely all knew each other. It could just be a personal relationship. It doesn't mean there was a professional involvement. You just don't know,
Yeah.
you know.
and if you go back to the founder of the family, William Pace Sr., I mean, arguably the most significant house that he built in St. Catharines was the old Mittelberger Mansion, or some people called it the Wright House, where the new courthouse is standing now.
Mhm.
On the back end, I mean, that was just, it was a magnificent house. And, you know, it was a real tragedy when it was lost. So right from the very beginnings, I mean, you know, the Pei family was just really, really important in terms of, you know, the built history.
Mhm. Yeah, he also built the Stevenson House Hotel and
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
and the Woodward House at 24 Yates Street. So, you know, some big accolades on his resume. All right. So let me find my all right. So I guess we need a motion that the discussion regarding ongoing research and upcoming deadlines regarding One Walnut Avenue be received. Anyone want to make that motion? Robert, in favor? All right, so that carries. And we now go back to item 7.4, 2 Queenston and 38 Geneva, the 906 evaluation. And Lauren's going to walk us through that.
I'll try to keep it quick. Rearrange things. So for 38 Geneva and 2 Queenston, having received Brian's research on the land use history and history of this property last month, moved ahead to look at the architectural and contextual descriptions for the property, and also put together kind of like a high level 906. Take a look at it, to go through it as a committee. So for the architectural description, located at the northeast corner of Queenston and Geneva Street, the building at 2 Queenston and 38 Geneva Street is a 2-story brick commercial structure with a complex construction history and numerous later additions. The property includes the original building built sometimes between 1838 and 1852, enlarged significantly in 1867, with architectural evidence of multiple construction phases visible in the variation in masonry and roof lines. The structure occupies a significant urban corner lot and contributes to the historic commercial streetscape just outside of downtown St. Catharines. The building has a stone foundation. The ground floor exhibits commercial or suggests a commercial storefront configuration with large window openings. There are 2 piasters. I don't actually know how to pronounce that word. Piasters. Piasters on the north and west facades. The walls are constructed of red-orange brick laid in common bond. Changes in brick coursing and color show different later additions to the buildings. The roof is clad in asphalt shingles and has simple boxed eaves along the side here. The north elevation features several commercial bays with large window openings at grade. Upper story windows are tall and narrow and symmetrically arranged. There's arch brick window openings with stone keystones and stone sills. The west elevation has a variety of window styles reflecting the development history of the building. Upper story windows along this section are also tall and narrow. And then along this section, you have these rectangular sash windows. The east elevation here backs onto a parking lot. It's more utilitarian in character. It has a series of different additions and rear service entrances. Changes in brickwork show the history and phases of construction. Openings on this elevation include both historic and modern door and window installations. Many of them have been altered or infilled, with some evidence of some former openings visible. This elevation is utilitarian in character, but reflects the continued changing and adaptation of the building for its commercial needs. And the self-elevation is oriented along a narrow setback from the adjacent property, and is unornamented with no window or door openings. And no evidence of the extension to the rear from this more gable to a kind of a salt box style roof is evidence in the changes to the brick. For the context, these right here. 2 Queenston Street and 38 Geneva Street are situated at the northeast corner of a prominent intersection, where Queenston Street and Geneva Street and St. Paul Street converge. This intersection is a node between the city's historic core and surrounding residential and institutional neighborhoods. The property occupies a visually prominent corner within a mixed-use corridor, and contributes to the historic commercial character of the area. The surrounding site features a mix of late 19th and 20th century commercial buildings, low-rise residential buildings, and institutional uses, with some contemporary infill developments. The site itself occupies a relatively flat parcel at the corner with limited landscaping and no substantial setbacks from the property lines. This siting reinforces the built-up street-oriented nature of the historic downtown grid. Yeah, that is generally the description of the context. So does anyone have any comments, additions, things to note?
When you're talking about the pilasters or on the building,
Pilasters, yep.
did you mention that they were cast iron?
Yes, I saw that they were cast iron, but I actually haven't confirmed that they were cast iron. You've confirmed that they're cast iron?
They are cast iron.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so
And
interesting. Yeah.
and there's only I think there's only 4 buildings in the downtown that have cast iron elements, and they all date from this kind of the same period.
Wow.
There's the hotel building that's almost across from the MTO. There's the bank building at the top of Queen Street, and then the old Opera House building on Ontario Street. And they all have cast iron bits and pieces.
I was like, I saw that and I'm like, it's like, really? Those are cast iron? So I have to go and confirm that, but that's amazing. Yeah. And also very, very uncommon. When do you think those would have been installed?
I think they were early 1870s.
Yeah, amazing.
I mean that was the big time period. Like even in Toronto on Front Street, you've got a lot of cast iron buildings, or buildings that have cast iron
Features.
columns and things.
Yeah.
And they're all from that same time period. So I'd say early 1870s.
Amazing. Okay. Should I go through the draft 906 then?
Yeah,
Or-
please.
Okay. Share again. Okay. So for design value, physical value, the building is a representative example of mid to late 19th century Victorian commercial architecture, featuring red orange brick laid in common bond, arch brick voussoirs, and cast iron store front pilasters. Accordingly, the property meets this criteria. the presence of Victorian cast iron pilasters, arched masonry openings with stone keystones and common bond brickwork reflect a high level of period craftsmanship. Accordingly, it meets the criteria. The building does not demonstrate any innovative technical or scientific construction achievements beyond that typical of the area. Accordingly, here. Accordingly, the property does not meet this criteria. The site is associated with several notable figures in St. Catharines' early commercial history. Accordingly, the property does meet this criteria. The layered construction history of the site offers insight into the evolution of downtown St. Catharines. However, this itself does not yield this information, and its history is well known and understood. Accordingly, this property does not meet this criteria. There's no clear evidence that a designer or architect of recognized community significant was responsible for this building's design. Accordingly, the property does not meet this criteria. For contextual value, the property occupies a visually prominent position at a gateway intersection and contributes to the continuity of the historic commercial core. Accordingly, it does meet this criteria. Although the property maintains historical and visual connections to surrounding buildings and the downtown streetscape, these connections do not define it or its value in a significant way. Accordingly, the property does not meet this criteria. And then as far as being a landmark, yes, the building is highly visible at a major intersection, was historically known as Wright's Corner or Brownlee's Corner, and accordingly, the property meets this criteria. Yeah. Any comments, concerns? I think a lot of the no's could be arguably yes, honestly. But I was trying to be a bit conservative, and it meets on a number of criteria. So criteria.
Well, I mean, you've got enough yeses there that it makes the building significant anyway.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I think it makes sense to lead with your strongest yeses,
Yeah.
as James said, you can't designate everything, and I think anything that seemed to be, arguing in favor of a gray area is going to be
Yeah.
hard to sell, whereas if you lead with your indisputables, then
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
right, that looks great. So what would the next step be on this?
So
Receiving the motion, but
yeah, so I guess the same with Christian's property, just to be directed to move ahead with putting together a statement, a more finalized 906 and heritage attributes for presentation next month. And then hopefully we'll get some feedback on that and move ahead with taking it to the broader advisory committee.
and so what would the motion be then that we would request that?
Oh,
Are we ready to take this, or do you think it needs
no,
another
I think,
revisit?
yeah, I think I have a draft motion. Do I have a draft motion in the script? Let's see. I guess, how about that the discussion regarding ongoing research and upcoming deadlines regarding 2 Queenston and 38 Geneva be received, and that staff be directed to proceed with the development of 1 second. How is this?
Sounds good.
That's good.
Would anyone like to make that motion as it's shown on the screen? Holly? And second? Robert? All right, so moved by Holly, seconded by Robert, that the discussion regarding the ongoing research and upcoming deadlines regarding 2 Queenston and 38 Geneva be received, and that staff be directed to proceed with contacting the property owner and the development of draft SCHVI and heritage attributes. In favor? All right, looks like 4 to zip, and that carries. Thank you, Lauren. That's nice to see that one getting one step closer for sure. Item 7.6, we no longer have Mark, so I guess that will be deferred to the next meeting, 219 Merit, the paper mill that Mark's been working on. So let's talk about next steps. Lauren?
I do feel like we've been talking about next steps throughout, but moving ahead with the St. Paul Crescent properties and 3 Elizabeth with the full committee, and then Christian and I continuing to work on 38 Geneva and 2 Queenston and 15 Welland Ave, and I think also I have Vine Street on my list to bring to you guys next month as well. The same thing with 38 Geneva and 2 Queenston, that kind of more architectural and contextual discussion, and a draft 906 for you to review. Yep.
Yeah, that sounds good. Anyone have any questions or thoughts on that? No?
And maybe we'll have a discussion about your properties, Andrew, and how we want to proceed with those for the next month or two. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy to. So we move on to business arising from the minutes. I have a question that I wouldn't mind getting a little guidance on from you, Lauren. Just in doing some of my digging around and research, I've come across a property that's on the market that is being listed as a development opportunity, but it's something that I think most of us would agree probably should have some preservation, some protection. What is the best approach in a case like that? Should we just send you the details and
Yeah. Is it listed?
no?
No? Okay. I will talk to James. I don't know, James, do we have a process for emergency listing things? If need be, or
We do not. It's possible, like I without knowing what the property is, it's hard to kind of know what our response might be, because there might be conversations we've had with the owner before, and it would depend on the property, right? So, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind passing along what address it is, and then we can kind of look into it and kind of go from there. But we don't really have a one size fits all rule, unfortunately, because every property might have its own little variables that are going on, right? So
Yeah, for sure. And I know there's no appetite to push things on people at all either, but
yeah.
just to have it on the radar would be good. And I don't want to sort of mention what it is. And this is a public discussion, and I don't want to get anybody uptight. Just sort of put it in your court, and you guys can go from there. Okay, thank you.
yeah, we can look at options. Thanks, Andrew.
Anything else, anyone?
I just have a quick question. I don't know if our committee is involved in this, but I saw a reminder about the Parquet naming down in Port Dalhousie. And is anything like from our committee, are we able to offer any naming suggestions, or do we stay out of that? Thank you.
Just through the chair. Yeah, so at our last Heritage Committee meeting, they came to us and recommended that the individual committee members, if you have any ideas, that you complete the survey. And I think that that's probably the approach that we'll take. They want our participation as people who are generally interested in history and heritage, and so and we're encouraged to participate through that survey process. Yeah.
Now that we're starting to get some of these properties, close to completion, not that I want work to be heaped upon the subcommittee, but are there a next lot of properties that we should start to maybe be looking at to keep this train chugging down the railroad tracks, so to speak?
Thanks. Through the chair. Yeah, I can take a look at our prioritization and bring up the next kind of grouping that we had. I know there are a number of properties that have been prioritized, but just weren't the top priorities. So I can kind of take the next, top 5 or top 8, and we can take a look at them and kind of decide what the next batch what that's gonna look like. Yeah, it's a good idea, Brian.
Okay, thanks.
And I think too, just to add on top of that, with the downtown stuff still being up in the air, having this kind of period where you guys have wrapped up a few of these properties and now we're looking to the next batch, it's actually good timing just in case that next batch is actually, downtown properties that maybe we'd have to pivot to. But we'll know more about that obviously next month. So hopefully, by the time we meet again, I think this group, we should have a better idea of where things are going downtown.
Do you think we could fairly quickly put together a list of high priority properties not covered by whatever transpires?
Well, so the report that our consultants provided us does have a list in there of properties that they recommend. So for individual designations, so we can look at those. And as part of those, they would have looked at how many criteria they believe each property would meet. So it would be very high level, obviously, because they aren't doing the nitty-gritty research and whatnot on every property, but we could always come up with some very quick criteria for how we'd want to tackle those properties that they're recommending. So we will have a list at least for us, and then it's just a matter of how this group would like to move forward with that list. But I think also depending on how things break down in terms of what areas maybe are left unprotected, there's going to be some obvious choices, I imagine, for this group as well, right? So, yeah.
That's what I was saying, jump on the obvious ones as quick as possible.
Yeah, like there's going to be ones where everybody's going to say, yep, that guy, right? Like I think that's probably going to be obvious. But yeah, we'll cross the road when we get to it, and that road's coming quick. It's a month away, so yeah.
Okay. Right. Anything else? No? Okay, so on items of correspondence, I don't believe there are any. Item number 10, date of our next meeting is scheduled for July 18th, 2025, which I believe is 4 days after the council meeting. Yep. So
yeah,
will be the right time to talk about it. Other than that, Robert?
Yes, through the chair. I was just wondering if we have confirmation of the date that we're going, or that council is meeting again, and that we're likely to attend.
Yeah, it's July 14th.
14th. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was going to be originally it was going to be the next meeting, which is the 23rd, but I am not available at that meeting. So it gives us a little more time to prep our report and get everything lined up, because the council made a request that we provide them with a little bit more information.
That's right.
And so we have to craft something in advance of that.
I was at the meeting.
I know you were. Yeah, it was nice to see. It was, as I said earlier in emails with you guys, it was nice to see friendly faces in the crowd when you're up in front of a whole bunch of people, right? So
That's right.
much appreciated that you were there.
That's great.
I have a question
Okay, well,
about
that's
that, but I'll
perfect.
save it for outside once we adjourn. So that's the next step, is to adjourn the meeting. Anyone like to make that motion? Brian? Moves that the St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee Designation Subcommittee be adjourned at 4:36 p.m. In favor? And that carries. We are now